really love that Leonard Cohen song because he has this beautiful intro to it where he says, "This is my thought. This was my prayer." And so the song speaks for him. It prays for him. And then these two beautiful voices come in and they complete this incredible prayer. And in many ways, what Leonard Cohen is doing there is what the psalmist does for us. So here we are, Lent 3 in the middle of Psalms. And today we're looking at a psalm of individual lament. But before we get to the psalm, I'm just going to go back and do a little bit of recap, if that sounds okay. The first week we looked at a liturgical psalm, a psalm that was likely used as people came in to the temple. It was a song that they would have sung where they expected God to be near. Last week was a wisdom psalm. And rather than going in the psalmist's mind, it was a little bit like the psalmist had some observations about the way that the world worked and the way that God worked. This week, we go into the mind of the psalmist. And the great thing about going into the mind of the psalmist is that we go into somebody's mind thousands and thousands of years ago, and we realize that their experience is the same kind of experience we have today. We've also talked about a couple different ways of reading the Psalms. One is to read the Psalms again and again. You read them when you wake up and when you go to sleep and before a meal. You read them and you think about them as you walk through the park and the grocery store, and eventually the Psalms become your prayer, and they begin to transform you and move you. We talked about interpreting the Psalms, that there's language in the Psalms that we're not always comfortable with, like the word wicked, but we recognize that there are wicked things in the world, and so we can reclaim those kind of words. And last week we spoke about structure, that Psalms often have a structure, and the structure can speak to us in a unique way, and that's no different from the Psalm that we have today. What I'd like to add to all of that is that the Psalms often use human images of God. So here are just a small sampling of the images that we use for God. We anthropomorphize God. We turn God into human because it's easier to understand God as a human. Like, we think about mothers. We think about mothers that are really good. And if we think about God as a mother, that brings to mind all sorts of wonderful ideas, and in that, we get a glimpse of God. But it's only a glimpse. Other people like to use potter. They like to use this image of God as a potter. They imagine a wheel with wet and dirty hands that forms beautiful creations. We like to imagine God like that. But that's just a glimpse. Other people like to imagine God like a warrior who stands up for what God believes in and is loyal. But that's just a glimpse. And others like to recognize God as king, like sitting on a big throne like Homer Simpson does. And so we have these ideas of God, but they're kind of incomplete. Because what we're talking about is something without an image, something that is like breath itself. We're talking about God, which is love and power and infinity, and it's pretty hard to put an image to that. I say this because it's helpful when it comes to Psalms like 139, where God is seemingly everywhere. And if God is just in human form in these Psalms, that can sound really creepy. Like, I go anywhere and God is there, and we picture this human being, and that's kind of terrifying. So we use those images to help us understand God, but that is not actually what we're talking about. So, to Psalm 139. I think it's about nakedness. I think this psalm is about the psalmist being naked. We'll explore that a little bit more as we go. Sometimes I've called for volunteers for a sermon. I'm not going to for this one. Imagine I called up a volunteer, and the volunteer is standing here, and I tell the volunteer, so what you're going to do is you're going to tell me everything about your life. You're going to tell me every temptation you've ever had, every crush you've had that you didn't want to admit you had. You're going to tell me everything you've done, every law you've broken, every speeding ticket you've got. You're going to tell us your deepest, darkest secret. And then after weeks and weeks of standing here listening to all of you, right, then I'm going to get you to take your clothes off and you're just going to be completely naked here. I think that's what the psalm is doing. And I'm not going to ask any of you to do that. Sighs of relief all over the place. So let's dive into the psalm. I think the psalm is divided into these beautiful kind of movements. There are 3 movements that kind of get the psalm going. Then there's this beautiful confession and a prayer to conclude it. So I'm just going to walk us through that little bit by little bit. Let's see where we go. And what I think this psalm is it's more than just the one-liners. Like, you knit me together in my mother's womb. Many of you will recognize that language. But the psalm is more than that as well. So, O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down, when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. I think what the psalmist is doing here is alluding to God in the mind. That somehow God is in our minds. The language, you searched me and you know me. You know every word even before it is spoken. There's a sense that God is knowledge and in our minds, and that is incredible. It also instills fear. It's like we're a little bit more naked in the sight of God. The second movement. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. So what's the psalmist saying in this movement? God is in place. Go up. God is there. Go down to the deepest, darkest caves and caverns. God is there. Go as far north, as far south, as far east, as far west as you can go, and there is God. God is in mind, and God is in place. Movement number 3. For it was you who formed me in my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven into the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. How weighty to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. I try to count them. They are more than the sand. I come to the end, and I am still with you. How about this movement? God is in mind, God is in place, and God is in time. Before we were born, before ultrasounds came along, there was God. And all the days of our lives, there was God. And when we come to the end, there is God. That God is in mind, in place, and in time. And if God is indeed in mind and in place and in time, we are left very naked and very vulnerable. There God knows everything. When God knows everything, there are things that we would rather that God not know. Deep, dark things that we would rather not admit to knowing or having inside of us. And it's with this that the psalmist, who's mostly naked, becomes completely naked in every sense of the word. It's a confession. Oh, that you would kill the wicked, O God, and that the bloodthirsty would depart from me, those who speak of you maliciously and lift themselves up against you for evil. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with perfect hatred, and I count them as my enemies. This is like those inward conflicts we all have. There's a lot of good in us, and there's some things that aren't so much. And there are things around us that aren't so good either. And so the psalmist here is saying, everything, here it is. It's all on the table. With it all on the table, just finishes with a simple prayer. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. See if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. This is me. Will you have me? Will you lead me? There's something to be said when you're naked and vulnerable. And really, the response when you're completely exposed there can be one of two reactions. I watch a lot of TV shows like House of Cards or The Good Wife, and in those shows, there are candidates that are running for political office. And these candidates that are running for political office are always running against somebody, and that somebody who's running against them does something called oppo research. And oppo research is opposition research. And the point of it is to expose everything about you. So they hire people to go and they try and find out everything there is to know about you. They want to know every paper you've ever written. They want to know every rally you've ever been at. They want to know every child that you had that you don't want to claim as yours. They want to know everything about you. And what's the point of getting all that research? It's to expose you and exploit you and crush you. Sometimes when we are vulnerable, people do that to us. They take what they know and they crush us with it. And our response is pretty obvious. We just put up walls and we say, you cannot come in anymore. You stay out there, I'll stay in here. And that is our boundary. The more we do that, the more our relationships break down. It's also what we see when we see Jesus crucified. We see a man naked on a cross, embarrassed in front of the entire world. Anyone can see it. There's another way that people can respond to our vulnerability. It's with an embrace. It's a little bit, human sexuality is a good way to talk about this one. Your partner knows you. They know your secrets. They know that you're not perfect. You take off your clothes, you're even more imperfect, and yet your partner embraces you and says, I will love you anyways. We see this embrace of vulnerability again and again in the scriptural account too. We see it with the woman at the well, right? 5 times divorced, cast out of her community, and there is Jesus embracing her. Or Nathan, the prophet, who calls out David, he puts his neck on the line, and there's a response. Or Esther, who goes into the court without an invitation and risks death to save her people. We see this kind of vulnerability responded to and embraced. It's encouraged, in fact. Imagine if our community could embrace people's vulnerability. Far too often, people come to church and they feel like they have to be perfect. They feel like they cannot cry, they cannot be honest. I actually remember the first time I was in church, and I asked somebody how they were, and they said, oh, I'm not good, but I'm not allowed to say that, am I? What would happen if our community could instead embrace people in their most vulnerable ways? That regardless of who you are and why you came, that you would be embraced. I think that kind of community could change the world. So here are some confessions I have for you. They start there. Some of them are softball, and some of them are a little bit harder. First, I hate snakes. If I see a snake, I pretend to be scared, but really, inside, my heart's 200 beats a minute, my palms are sweaty, and I pretend to be bold, but I'm terrified. I don't like snakes. Sometimes I love preaching. Sometimes I hate preaching. Sometimes I feel like I'm on display, and that just feels gross. Number 3, it's been really hard living on Vancouver Island. It's pretty lonely, actually, and there's a lot of friends back home that I really miss. And number 4, I'm a really insecure person. I project confidence, but in order to overcome all of this, I just work really hard, and I'm insecure. I don't tell you any of this so that you'll protect me from snakes or reassure me in my vulnerability, but that's just part of who I am. And I think if all of you were honest, you would have your list too, and our lists would be longer than 4. But imagine what would happen if we were a community that took people, vulnerable as they were, and embraced them and said, you are loved. No matter what you feel, no matter what you think, no matter how you're doing, we will love you. So our prayer becomes the same as the psalmist. Search us, God, and know us. Test us and know our thoughts, and lead us in the way everlasting.